Welcome back to Train Signal. This is Elias Knaser and you're watching Integrating Orchestrator 2012. Alright, so everything that we've been talking about during this course essentially culminates in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about kind of that last piece, that last mile before everything comes together. And we've talked a little bit earlier in other lessons about, well, how do you empower users to be able to then consume all of the services that we're creating? We talked about the virtual machine management console, how to give delegated access to users using the virtual machine management console. We also talked about App Controller and how you can leverage that as a management console for your users to, again, build services, create services, manage services, etc. But since the start of the course, we've been talking about, well, how do I enable self-service users to request virtual machines, to request services, and have these services automatically deployed. Well, up until now, we couldn't discuss that because we didn't have the component that essentially allowed the user to create that request ticket, that service ticket. That component was Service Manager. That Service Manager is the location where your users are going to go and open a ticket for a virtual machine request, for an Active Directory user account, etc. So once we put Service Manager into the environment, well, now we have all the building blocks for us to create that self-service user experience for creating services, virtual machines, but also other repeatable tasks, other things that we do in our environment on a day-to-day basis. So before I get into how this relates to VMM and the private cloud, let's talk about the importance of Orchestrator. And I've brought up a whiteboard here because I want to illustrate and I want to essentially highlight why Orchestrator is an essential piece of this entire puzzle. So most environments that I've seen, if not all environments that I've seen, have different levels of automation that are built into scripts. Everybody's built a script that would make a certain function in their environment easier. Now, if you're like me, I'm a visual person, and while I've written scripts and I can write scripts, scripts take a while to write sometimes, and they take a lot of coding to do, and it's cool. And VB script was cool, and PowerShell is cool, and other languages are cool. It's just you gotta write code, and I'm a visual person. If there was a way for me to kind of accomplish the same thing, except doing it visually using my keyboard and mouse, well, I prefer that. And Orchestrator is exactly that. So while PowerShell and VB script and others were great, they were good abstraction layers for an automation engines. What Orchestrator allows us to do is the developers, what they've done for us is, again, they've created another form of abstraction layer. They've taken all the complexity out of writing scripts, and they've created these objects, if I can call them, and you'll understand here in a second once we get into the GUI demonstration. They've created these objects that we can essentially put together as if you were building Visio. Now, when I look at Orchestrator, and I think you'll agree with me, when I look at Orchestrator, you'll find that you're dragging objects onto a canvas and then you're connecting these objects together to create some kind of a workflow, some kind of an automated engine, and you're applying properties onto these objects. So this might be an input object that tells this particular object, what name to get, what IP address to get, maybe what domain to join, etc. And if this fails, well, this is what you would do. Well, if this is successful, if it's failed, then this is what you do, and this might be, hey, maybe log an entry into the event log, etc. So Orchestrator gives you that GUI approach to automation, gives you that simplicity of, instead of writing these complicated scripts, well, now you are putting these pieces together as if you were putting together a Visio diagram, and you'll see that in a second again. Now, the other advantage of using something like an Orchestrator is you have that centralized location where you're executing all of these essentially runbooks from. So you might have one runbook that will take a particular user, right, and it will put that user into a group of users. Don't mind my drawing here, but I'm just trying to illustrate what it means, right? So this is a task that in all organizations, you'll find that if you open your service request tickets, it's full of requests for, hey, add John to the user group HR, or add John to the user group, I don't know, maybe IT or marketing, right? So this is a task that is a repeatable task, that is a task that the administrator probably hates doing, but has to do. And this is where you go in, open Active Directory, drag the user, or add the user to a particular group. Well, what if we automated this process? So through Service Manager, they can go to a portal, and they can request to add John Doe to the group marketing. And if we've built the right runbooks in the backend, and it gets all the correct approvals, well, then the runbook is automatically going to query Active Directory and add that user for me without me having to do that. Well, just imagine how quickly those service request tickets will be closed. Just how quickly this will happen, just how quickly this turnaround will happen. And during all of this, you have very good auditing and very good change management. So Orchestrator sits in the center of all of these different components, executing runbooks to perform repeatable tasks that we don't want to deal with anymore. That's in general. Now let me show you how it relates to the private cloud and VMM, which is what we've been building during this course. So far what we've done is we've created VMM, right? And VMM, think of it as this abstraction layer for, your Hyper-V. And below that, you have your different resources, network, storage, servers, etc. Right? So we're able to provision and create the templates and create the services. All of that was great, right? This is beautiful. And then we augmented that a little bit later on with Operations Manager. Right? So Operations Manager is what's going to give you your monitoring into this great environment that we've created. Well, that's fantastic as well. What did we do next? Well, we created Service Manager, right? So Service Manager also integrates into Ops Manager and also integrates into VMM here so that you can import, or so that Ops Manager can automatically open tickets. Once it detects that there's something going on in this environment, it's going to open a ticket. You can also import some of the configuration items from VMM into Service Manager so that you can, when you're opening tickets, you can associate them with the right services, the right VIPs, all of the stuff that I showed you earlier on. Well, all of this is great, but I now want to create this self-service portal here for my user. Let's call it self-service portal, so that when they're opening a request through Service Manager, it is automatically getting executed on VMM. So instead of me looking at my service queue here, my ticket queue, right, and seeing, well, there's a request for a VM, and then I go about doing it manually for them, and then make it available, or if I'm giving them access to the VMM console maybe, or app controller, that's another way of doing it. But this is maybe for power users. Right? Maybe I want to do something for HR or marketing where they're probably not going to use this. They're just going to go in and want to request a service, something very similar to what Azure looks like, right? Similar, not exactly, but similar. They're used to opening service request tickets. Well, how do I enable that? Well, you enable that by putting Orchestrator in the middle of all of this. When we create runbooks, and these runbooks again can be a whole slew of automations, but in this case, let's assume that we want to create a runbook that would automate the creation of a new virtual machine, and that would allow the user that is making the request to input the name of this virtual machine. Well, if it gets all the approval process correct, well, then Orchestrator is going to execute that on VMM. So Orchestrator is that automation engine that sits between your Service Manager and your VMM that executes repeatable tasks and automates them, stuff that you don't want to do on a continuous basis. Orchestrator can integrate with a lot of other things. It can integrate with Ops, it can integrate with Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint. It has a lot of hook-ins, right? Or a lot of integration points. For us, we are just going to focus on Orchestrator as it relates to VMM. All virtualization shops that I visited recently have started to look at Orchestrator, and this is not just those shops that have Microsoft virtualization. Those shops that also have VMware virtualization are starting to look at Orchestrator. Orchestrator is typically the first step for you on your journey to your private cloud. You are starting to automate these workloads. You are starting to automate these repeatable tasks, either for VMM, for Hyper-V, for vSphere, for whatever it is. Now, once you become familiar with automation, then you're going to start thinking about Service Manager and the request tickets and all. That's where the private cloud starts to come together. So in this course, we've attempted to show you how do you bring all of these components together. Now, because Orchestrator is again, just like Service Manager and Ops Manager, they're very extensive, and for the purposes of this course, we're just going to show you the integration, but I'm also going to go a little beyond the Call of Duty here and show you what it looks like from start to finish, even though that's, again, outside of the scope of this and outside of the scope of the exam. For the exam, all you need to know is how to get these integration points done, and we'll talk about those. But I'm going to take you through the whole step just so you can see it, so that I can give you closure as it relates to this course. So hopefully this gives you a good understanding of why Orchestrator, where Orchestrator fits in, and how this works, right? So the request comes in from the user, it gets logged into Service Manager. Service Manager has an integration point with Orchestrator. Orchestrator has been populated with the runbooks. These runbooks are querying VM templates and services that are in VMM. It is the engine that is going to make that happen, and it's very customizable, very flexible. Think of this as your new PowerShell, except it's a GUI. So that's the way I like to look at it. So what are we going to talk about in this lesson? So let me show you kind of what we're going to do, because there's a lot of steps involved, and I kind of want to break it down and give you breaking points so that okay, we've finished a particular task. Otherwise it's going to become overwhelming, and I don't want it to become overwhelming. I want it to be very structured for you. And in the spirit of that structure that I'm talking about, every time we finish a task off of this list, we're going to come back to this list and make sure we check it off. Because if I run through this exercise from start to finish, it's going to be overwhelming. You're not going to know what I'm doing and where I'm doing it, and where a particular task ends and where a particular task begins. So what I'm going to do, every time we finish one of those tasks, we're going to come back to this presentation here, and we're going to check it off and then go back into the GUI and do the next one, so that you can visualize the flow of things and it's not overwhelming. You kind of have a breakpoint. But in order to accomplish this, there's one thing that I need you to also download, which is System Center 2012 Orchestrator component add-ons and extensions. This is where you're going to be able to download the integration packs that we're going to use in this lesson. I'll show you the website when we get into the GUI as well, but I wanted to make that available through the presentation so that you kind of, if you wanted to type it or click on it. As with Service Manager and Ops Manager, I'm not going to show you the installation of Orchestrator, and we're not going to go through all of that. That's, again, outside of scope of this course. So I've already done that installation. So at this point, I would recommend that you, again, pause the video, build your Orchestrator, build the web console for Service Manager. And if you want to follow along exactly, you'll have to also deploy a SharePoint server so that you can install the web parts from Service Manager into that SharePoint site, because it creates a SharePoint site which we're going to use. So there's a lot of different components. There's good documentation on TechNet on how to do these. They're, for the most part, out of the box installations. There's really nothing special. I've added a server that is dedicated for Orchestrator, and I've also installed, again, like I said, the web console for Service Manager, and also the website, the SharePoint website for Service Manager, which is part of the Service Manager installation for the web console. When you go through the web console, it'll give you two components to install. The prerequisite for the SharePoint, obviously you would have to have SharePoint installed, SharePoint 2010 installed. And for SharePoint 2010, it is, as of this recording, not supported on System Center or on Windows Server 2012. So you'll have to bring up a Windows Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 or higher server for that particular SharePoint, and to be able to install the site, the website from Service Manager onto that. That being said, what we want to start off with first, and let's go back to that earlier slide, is we want to start with the installation of the integration packs. All right, so we're over here on our Orchestrator server, and you'll notice it's called SCO for System Center Orchestrator. And I've already downloaded those integration packs. I've already downloaded them into this directory here onto my desktop. Where I got them from was that same location that I showed you in the presentation, and here it is, just in case you wanted to do a quick Google search on it. I've tried to copy and paste the exact same name, which would make it easier. And then that's the file that I downloaded. Once you extract that, you'll get to those files that you see on my desktop. But you're probably asking at this point, well, Eli, why do I need an integration pack? What is an integration pack? So before we go ahead and deploy it, let me show you why we need an integration pack by bringing up the Orchestrator Designer, which exists here under our Start menu, under our Runbook Designer. Remember I told you it looks like Visio, kind of? It reminds me of Visio. Well, this is where you would come in and essentially design that automation that you are trying to put together, that you are trying to create. It is called a runbook. Though that's where you drag and drop certain things. So instead of you typing in a line of code to execute a certain function and then another line of code to link that up and execute a different type of function or fill in a value or any of those, well, you are being provided with assets, with objects here that are divided into different categories of things that you can configure. These are all things that you can configure. Now, for example, if you wanted to create a folder, you are able to drag and drop this object onto the canvas here, and you're able to set it in the right location. So maybe create a folder comes first, and then, I don't know, maybe decompress file comes after that. In order for you to link these two together, once you put your mouse, you hover the mouse over the object, you'll see that you have these arrows. You drag and drop, right? And you've just created a link between these two objects. You can drag something else onto this canvas monitor file, for instance, and do the same thing. Whoops. And do the same thing here. Well, this one is not a valid connector, obviously, but you get the picture. And under each one of these objects, you can go in there and enable it. Some of them are going to have properties where you can modify the value of what this object has, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, the reason we need integration packs is, a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't have any of the objects here that would relate to the system that we're working with, which in my case is VMM. I don't have any of the VM templates or the VM objects or any of that. If you wanted to do that with Operations Manager or Active Directory, any of those, well, we don't really have any of those objects that we can drag and drop, and that's where your integration pack is going to come into play. So let me go ahead and exit out of here. Once you've downloaded those integration packs onto the desktop, we're going to use another tool that is also available to you through the Start menu, part of your Orchestrator installation, which is called Deployment Manager. Once you have Deployment Manager here, we're going to click on Integration Packs. We're going to right click on it, and then we're going to do register integration packs with the Orchestrator Management Server. Now, the Orchestrator Management Server, think of it as your centralized location for managing and running all of your runbooks. We're going to click on Next, and then we're going to click on Add. We're going to point to the location where we've downloaded these integration packs. I can't do them all at the same time, so I'm going to have to do them one at a time. And voila, once you have them all in here, we're going to click on Next, and we're going to go ahead and click on Finish. Now, while it's registering them, it's going to ask you to accept that registration, and it's going to do it several times for each one of those integration packs that you're trying to input into this server. And you'll find that there they are. Well, now that they're in there, what we want to do is we want to deploy these integration packs to runbook servers running the runbook designer, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on Next, and then we're going to select those integration packs that we want to essentially deploy, right? So I'm going to copy, or I'm going to select just the 2012 ones. So I'm going to go with this. We're going to go with this, and we're going to select the top one here. So we're essentially going to avoid the ones from earlier versions. We're going to click on next. We're going to point it to the right server that is hosting that runbook server. And in my case, it's SEO. So we're going to click on add, and then we're going to click on next. When do you want this installation to happen? Do you want it immediately? Do you want to perform it at a later time? It's up to you. I'm just going to go ahead and do it at this point. Do you want to stop all running runbooks before you apply this, or do you kind of want to install the integration packs or hotfixes without stopping them? I'm going to go ahead and say stop them. I'm going to click on next here, and then we're going to click on finish. This will take a few seconds or a few minutes for this to go through and install all of them. All right, now what we need to do is we need to make a connection between Orchestrator and these different systems that we have out there. Orchestrator and System Manager, Service Manager, Orchestrator, and Ops Manager, Orchestrator, and VMM. We need to make that connection point. Now remember, that connection point is going from Orchestrator into these systems. So I'm saying that because at a later step, we're going to make a connection from Service Manager back into Orchestrator. So the step that you're seeing now is simply the integration of Orchestrator one way from Orchestrator to Service Manager, essentially. To do that, let's get out of here and bring back up that Runbook Designer. And from this console, what we're going to do is point to options here, and we're going to click down on where it says, we're not going to do the Configuration Manager or the Protection Manager. Let's start off with Operations Manager here. We're going to click on Add. And in my case, my server is ops.wiredbraincoffee.com. The domain is wiredbraincoffee. The username that I'm going to use is administrator, and I'm going to provide my super secret password. And let's go ahead and click on OK. So once that's done, we're going to click on Finish, and then we're going to do the same thing for Virtualization Manager here, or Virtual Manager. I'm going to click on Add. In my case, it's vmm01.wiredbraincoffee.com. And from the type down here, we're going to simply select Virtualization Manager. And on this screen, what we have to do is we have to configure the properties of the connection to VMM that we're trying to create. So where it says VMM Administrator Console, while we know what this means, it could be kind of, I don't know, confusing as to what this value needs to be. So you can point this to one of two places, right? So they're basically asking, where is the VMM Administrator Console installed? Where is it located? If you have it on a dedicated management PC like we do, you can put in the IP address or the fully qualified domain name of that machine, or you can point it to the VMM server if you know that your console is installed there. To keep things simple, I know that I've installed it on both places, but I'm just going to point it to the actual server. My VMM server is not on the local host, so I'm also going to point that over there. I'm going to specify the administrator as a user that has access to make changes. We're going to select our domain here, and we're going to put in our password. So this is important because if you don't put in these values correctly, you'll see in a step later on, as we're trying to pull values out of VMM, that particular connection will not populate any of those fields. So make sure that you're pointing to the actual administrator console, because it's through that console that this is going to communicate and grab these values that it needs. You can scroll down. These are essentially the most important fields that you need to populate. The rest are just simply defaults. We're then going to go ahead and click on OK. And we're going to click on Finish, and that will go about creating this particular connection. And let's go ahead and do the same thing for Service Manager. Whoops, and I don't seem to have Service Manager 2012 here, so we must have missed that. Let's do that real quick by bringing back up that Deployment Manager here. Let's right-click on that integration pack, and then let's register that. It's kind of annoying because it wouldn't allow me to do all of them at the same time, so I had to do those manually. So let's see here. I am looking for Service Manager 2012. And there it is. Let's go ahead and click on Open here, and then let's do a Next. And let's finish. We're going to agree. And then let's go ahead and also make sure that we have deployed that. Let's click on next and let's locate it. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and select that. We're going to do next. And we're going to do that to the server SCO again. Next. We're going to just do this automatically right now. Finish. And let's go ahead and now exit out of this console. Let's exit out of here and launch that one more time to make sure that it's refreshed. And let's try this again. There it is. So once we click on that, let's make the connection with that as well. And I'm going to go ahead and click on add here. Service manager here. And then let's do sm.wiredbraincoffee.com. For a domain, we're just going to do my domain here, Wired Brain Coffee. Username is administrator. And the super secret password. This is some monitoring information and intervals down here. Once you're ready, we're going to click on OK. Then we're going to go ahead and click on Finish. Well, now if you take a look at this Orchestrator designer here, or this runbook designer, you'll find that we've imported these integration management packs or these integration packs, and now we have access to them. So for instance, under your virtual management machine manager here, you'll find that you have, for instance, create new disk. You create new disk from template. Maybe you have the create checkpoint. You have create VM from template. So you have these objects that can now be dragged onto the canvas, and you can create meaningful and logical automation out of runbooks, which is what we're going to do next. But let's go ahead and switch back to our presentation here. Alright, so step number 1, we have successfully installed and configured the integration pack, and we've also made these connections over to the different systems that we have in our environment. Up next is what we're going to do is creating a runbook. Alright, so we're going to create a simple runbook just to give us an idea, or just to give us a way to illustrate this example. What I want to do is I want a way to allow users later on in the end game to be able to open a service request ticket, input some information, and then automatically create a virtual machine. Well, if I'm going to construct that, then I want those users to create or to request that information and then create the VM from a template. Now, this object doesn't help me much because this is just the object that's going to create the virtual machine from template. I need some kind of an input document, some kind of an input value, some kind of an input data in order to customize this for the user. Otherwise, if I hard code everything here, well, that kind of defeats the purpose. They're all going to get the same VM named Eli. That's not going to help, right? So I need to give them some flexibility of values that they can input that would allow them to customize this. So the first step is, if we click down here on Runbook Control, what I want to do is I want to drag onto the canvas something called initialize data. Once I drag this onto the canvas here, we're going to make that connection between initialize data and the actual create from VM template object that we just dragged. Well, in order for me to populate this particular request here with the right data in order to customize this object, this template, I need to figure out first, well, what are the requirements? What are the values that this particular object needs? So to do that, what I'm going to do is right click on it, and we're going to drag down here to properties. And then we're going to configure this so that it's pointing to our VMM server, so that's where it's going to get the template from. You're then presented with a screen that looks like this. So the first thing that we want to do is the destination type. Are you deploying this to a cloud, or are you deploying this to a host? Well, since the whole course has been about cloud, I'm going to select cloud here. We're going to click on OK. Next up is going to be the destination name. This is essentially, well, which cloud are we going to point to? Now, this could be a variable that we want to make available for a user to input at a later point, which is during the service request. They might want to say, okay, deploy this virtual machine to the West cloud or the East cloud. etc. Or it might be something that we can populate a little bit later on, but this is essentially the destination name. I'm going to leave this blank. The path here doesn't apply because we're deploying this to the cloud. If we were deploying this to a host, then you would have to specify a path. The VM name is again a field that I want the users during the service request form to populate with some kind of a value. So I'm going to leave this blank and make a connection a little bit later on. From a source template name perspective, well, what do you want this template? How do you want this VM to be deployed? What kind of template are we going to use as the basis? If I click on the box here, you'll find that you're making a connection back to VMM, and it's displaying all the templates that we have access to inside of VMM. I'm going to go ahead and click this particular one. And then under the cloud capability profile, again, we're going to make that connection to VMM. And we know that we've configured Hyper-V as a cloud capability profile, so I'm going to select that. This is really cool because you're seeing all these integration points between Orchestrator and VMM, Service Manager and VMM, Service Manager and Orchestrator. You're seeing how this whole thing is coming together really nicely here. Now, if you wanted to add any more advanced options, you can select optional properties, and you can go about and choose those optional properties, things like, the domain name, domain password, etc. For the purposes of my example, this is just fine for me, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish here. Now that I know what the requirements are for this object, let's come in here and right-click, drag down to Properties. And what I want to do is I want to add in two values, right? So the first one that I left blank, that I said, we would come back here and essentially configure, was cloud. That's essentially the cloud name. So if I do this, that's the cloud name. And then if we wanted to come in and add another one here, and we're going to name this the VM name. Let's do it this way. These are the two variables. These are the two input fields that we want our users to be able to configure when they're opening up a service request ticket. And this is how they're going to customize that virtual machine that gets deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish here. All right, now the last step I want to do is I want to link the data that I created in here, those fields that I created in here, into this VM template. To do that, we're going to right-click and we're going to go into Properties one more time. And this time under the destination here, we're going to right-click on it inside the form here, and we're going to go to Subscribe, and we are going to subscribe to a published data. That published data is what we created in the earlier step. In this case, it's the cloud name. We're going to click on OK. We're going to do the same thing down here into the VM name. We're going to right-click on it, and we're going to go to Subscribe Data and Publish Data, and we're going to click VM name. So this essentially links what we created in the earlier step here with those variables into this VM template that we are linking to, and the create VM template that we are linking to. We added the template name, we added the capability profile here. We don't have any additional advanced options, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on Finish. All right, my last step here, now that I've created everything, this is the runbook that I want, is I want to go ahead and, we can simply, if we wanted to, rename this particular runbook here so that it is called, for example, Wired Brain Coffee-VM runbook. And then the final step is to actually check it into the runbook server here. And voila. So we've completed that second step. So what have we done so far? We've installed the integration packs, we've configured those, and we've also created the runbook. So now what we're going to do is actually integrate that runbook into Service Manager. All right, so earlier on, we created the connection between Orchestrator and the different systems that we had, VMM, Service Manager, Ops Manager, etc. Well, that was that one way that I was talking about. Well, now we have to create the connection between Service Manager and Orchestrator so that Service Manager can now have access to all of the Orchestrator objects like runbooks and other things that we can incorporate within the service request templates and offerings that we're going to build. In order to do that, we're going to follow the same type of process that we did in that earlier lesson by creating a new connection. And this time we're going to point it down to Orchestrator. We're going to click on Next to continue, and we're going to simply name this SCO. Next. We're going to input the Orchestrator web service URL here, which I've already made available and accessible to me. I'm going to select that workflow account. We're going to click on Next here, enter our super secret password. Hopefully I've entered this correctly. The connection was successful. We're going to click on OK. Now here's where, within Orchestrator you can create different folders, and these folders can be used to group different things. For instance, you might want to separate your production items from your test items, from your development items. You might do it via regions. If you create folders within Orchestrator that you want to synchronize with Service Manager, then those would have showed up under here, and you would have had the option of selecting which folder you wanted to do that with. For now, I'm just going to select the root. I don't have anything in particular that I want to specify, and we're going to click on Next here. And then you have to also provide the Orchestrator web console URL, and they've given you essentially what this looks like. So what I'm going to do here is just put in HTTP SCO:82 for the actual port here, and then we're going to click on Next. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and click on Create. Once that's successful, we're going to go ahead and click on Close. Now, to be honest with you, as far as the exam is concerned, as far as those of you that are sitting the exam, this is where it stops, right? This is where that integration between Orchestrator and Service Manager, Orchestrator and VMM, and those two-way connections now that we have, and Service Manager can now pull in objects from within Orchestrator like runbooks and others things. This is kind of where I should stop, but I know that if I stop at this point, you guys will probably kill me, so we're going to finish the exercise. But just so you know that, essentially at this point, this is where the integration ends. Now, once you've created that connection with Service Manager, that connection will synchronize automatically, especially with those folders every so often. If you wanted to if you want to initiate that synchronization manually, then you can always select this particular connection and then just click on Synchronize Now. All right, next up now, before we finish up this step, is we have to configure that object in the Service Manager library for the runbook. Recall in the earlier lesson when we were doing this, we created the object for group so that we can group all of these computer names. Well, we're going to do something kind of similar. If we click on the runbooks node here, and after a second or two, it will show up here. Now, if it doesn't show up, make sure you hit the refresh or go back to your connector under Administrator and make sure you're resyncing manually that connection between Orchestrator and Service Manager, so that Service Manager is able to pull those runbooks that we just created out of Orchestrator. Well, now that we have this runbook into Service Manager, we're going to select it. Once you select it, you're going to get a bunch of options here on the right. What we want to create at this point is the Create Runbook Automation activity. Now, we're going to simply give this a name. So to keep this simple, I'm just going to name this VM Request. And what we're doing now is we're essentially creating that template, you can call it, that runbook template that's going to contain sort of metadata for this particular request that we're trying to build, to create. Now, the class for this is going to be a runbook automation activity. What I want to do as well here is create a new management pack. This management pack is going to contain all the data that we're configuring in here, and also make it easy and portable for you to move this management pack around. So what I'm going to do is click on New here, and I'm going to simply call this again VM Request. You can give it a description if you choose. We're going to click on OK. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and click on OK. This will bring up this particular window where you're going to go about giving it more information and more data. Now, from a title perspective, again, I'm going to stick with the name that we have been giving this thing, and you can call it VM Request again. You can go through and populate all of this information if you choose to do so. The important thing here is to make sure that you're selecting is ready for automation. So that will essentially let the Service Manager know that this thing is ready for automation, and if anybody requests this, and it's going to allow it to go through because it is ready for automation. It's been tested, it's been validated. Now, if you focus your attention here on the Runbook tab, you'll notice something very interesting. Those are the two data points that we created earlier on, if you recall, when we were creating that runbook in Runbook Designer where we've specified these two variables as values that need to be entered. So let's stop here for a second and take a look at what we've done so far. And these are additional mappings, right? So what we're doing here is we're preparing this so that this shows up in the service request so that the user can input this particular information that's going to be then passed on to Orchestrator and in turn to VMM to be applied to that new virtual machine that we're creating. So what have we done so far? If you recall, the first thing that we did is we got the information that we needed to populate, and we got that out of VMM, right? So we got that template, and the properties of that template told us, for instance, that we need to populate the name, and we also need to populate, well, which cloud do you want to put this on? This is one of those variables that we chose to configure. There are others, but essentially VM told us gave us those variables, and we've chosen these two. Now these variables come obviously from VMM, where this particular virtual machine lives or will be living. What did we do at that point? Well, at that point, we also created that runbook, if you recall, under Orchestrator. And what we did then is we created that essentially the initialized data. In the initialized data, we created those two mappings, right? So we created one for cloud name, as you can see here. And we created one for VM name as well. Now those two currently are mapping to these two variables on the actual virtual machine. Well, we're taking it one step further now, and we are building that logic, if I can call it, into Service Manager, right? So as you can see here, what we're doing from this action activity that we're creating is that we're preparing this so that we can make mappings further from the service request form or the service request activity to pass this on to Orchestrator, who will in turn pass it on to the VMM and then will execute against that new virtual machine that's being created. So you're seeing that every step of the way we are creating these links between the different systems, these links even down to the values here, the variables, all the way through until our finished product. So that's all that I have to create here. What I'm going to do at this point is click on OK. And this completes this portion, this step. So I want to go back and again check that box and just make sure you have an opportunity to see where we're at in this process. Alright, so we can put the check mark now next to integrating the runbook into Service Manager. So again, we installed the integration packs, we created our runbook, we then integrated the actual Orchestrator with Service Manager, and then we also imported that runbook and created a runbook activity out of it. Up next, we're going to create a template. Let's go ahead and do that. Alright, in the library node here, under templates, what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to click on create template. And at this point, we are creating that service request template. What is it going to go about doing? How is it going to do it? What is the right activity, etc. So I'm simply going to create something that is called new VM request. We're going to have to give this a class. What is this particular activity? Now this will have to be a service request. So as a result, we're going to choose that. And then we're going to apply our particular management pack here, which is the VM request. And then we're going to go ahead and click on OK. Now once you do that, it's going to bring up this particular form here. You can again, fill out any particular information that you would need, such as the urgency, the priority, etc., all of the basics that you would want. For our purposes, what we're going to do is come here to activities. What we need to do in a template, in any template as a matter of fact, is essentially set the order in which things would run, right? So we created earlier on that runbook activity, which is going to go about and implement things. Now we have to create any prerequisites that we want before that runbook activity happens. Do you want to put any kind of approval process in place? Typically, in the manual world that we live in today, somebody's going to send an email and say, hey, we need to create this VM for HR, for Amanda and HR. Do you approve, yes or no? Or you're going to open some kind of a ticket, and then someone will call manually and verify, and then put approval in there, close the ticket, etc. Well, you can now automate this whole process. So if we click on this cross up here, and we're going to get access to all these templates. One of these templates is actually a review activity, which means that if you specify this particular one here, it's going to bring up a window that is similar to this. What you're putting in here essentially is a review process, right? So review process for new VM request. So before that runbook activity actually tries to go about implementing the creation of the new virtual machine, it's going to send this for approval from the requested party, right? So who are you wanting to approve this particular ticket? And to specify that user, we're going to come down here to where it says add, and you can either do a domain or you can do a user. You can do both if you choose to do so. For instance, if I do domain admins, there it is. We're going to double click on that. We're going to click on OK. It puts it down here. Now you have the option as you're configuring this. So for example, if we go back and click on edit here real quick, you have the option of specifying whether or not this user or group of users has to vote. So they must cast their vote whether it's approval or not. And they have the option to veto this. So maybe the approval process includes you and your boss, which means that you might be able to say, yes, I'm going to approve this, but for reasons unknown to you, maybe your manager is going to veto that decision, which means this new virtual machine is not going to be created. For our purposes, we're going to leave both of these blank. Now, again, you have the option, if you have more than one party involved, of making the vote unanimous before that approval process happens, or you can choose, again, a percentage. You can get very creative here in terms of how you want to craft this approval process. So you see how automated this whole thing has become. For our purposes, we're going to keep it unanimous. We're the only ones voting. We're going to go ahead and click on OK. Now once this initial step takes place, well, now we have the option of coming in here and also adding that runbook activity that we created earlier. So in our case, that would be our VM request here. These are all the options that we created in that earlier step, so we're not going to go through them again, but I'm just trying to show you here that essentially we've done this before. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on OK. And at this point, this particular template is ready. So what I'm going to do is click on OK here. And this takes care of the template. Let's go back to our presentation real quick. And we can now check on the creating a template. That has been completed. 2 more steps to go. We're going to create a service request, and then we're going to create a service offering. Hopefully this method of me switching back to the presentation is helping you again understand the different steps, giving you sort of breaks within these steps so that you know where things start and where things end, because there's a lot involved, and if there's one particular piece that you didn't know, this gives you a chance to kind of go back and go over this material again. Let's go about creating a service request now. We're almost there. 2 more steps. So under the service catalog here, the first thing that we want to do is create a request offering. That's the first step, and then we're going to do the service offering, and that'll be the last step. To do that, what we're going to do is right click and again create request offering. We're going to go ahead and click on next here, and we're going to simply name this new VM request offering. You can give this a description. Again, I'm going to just stick with a new VM request offering here. From a templates perspective, we're going to go ahead and select our template here, which we just created, the new VM request here. We're going to select that. We're going to keep the correct management pack in place, and then we're going to go ahead and click on next. If there was any form instructions that you wanted to provide the users, you can essentially put them in here. So one of the things that you can put in here is maybe use this form to request a new virtual machine. Now we also have to create those fields within the request form that we're going to later map to the variables that we had created earlier. But we need to give these fields kind of a friendly name within our form so that they look better, the user understands what they're supposed to do. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to simply select here, where do you want to place this VM? This would be the question, for instance. This would be a required or an optional field. And then over here, right now, it's set to text. Now, you can click on this and essentially create a query out of it, which means instead of having the user punch in, which cloud they want to essentially point this virtual machine to, maybe it's a drop down that you're providing for them, which lists all the clouds that are available, and as a result, they can select which one they want. This is outside of scope for what we're trying to do. Again, I just want to go through this exercise just so you see it from start to finish. But you can construct further automation within these fields so that they're automatically checking in and grabbing some of these available options that you have here so that you're making it even easier for your user. For now, I'm just going to stick with text here. Let's go ahead and select that. And then we're going to add another one for the VM name. What name do you want to give this VM? And again, this is a required option. We're going to keep this as text here. You can feel free to move those up or down if you choose to do so, if you want them in a different order. When you're ready, we're going to click on Next. On this screen, you have the option of specifying, well, what type of field is this going to be? So, for example, in here, you can configure this to be, a field of specific type. So it could be, allow any string. It could be an email address, which means it would require that @ sign. It could be a phone number. It could be an international phone number. So you're essentially specifying what you're expecting to see in that particular variable in there. So for my cloud one, I'm not going to make any changes in there. But for the VM name, well, that might require some additional stuff because you might want to have limits on here. So you might want it not to be less than 6 characters long, for instance, and you might not want it to exceed 15 characters. So those might be limitations that you're trying to impose on the user. It has to be at least 6 characters long, and it can't exceed 15 characters for the NetBIOS name to be properly configured. So you can specify those as limitations there, and then you can click on Next. At this point, this is where we're going to make that linkage between the forms that we just created and what we're seeing here in our VM request. This is the runbook automation activity that we created earlier that has our template, that has the runbook that we created in Orchestrator, has the values. So for instance, here you'll see that this is the particular value for the VM name from our runbook, and we have to map this with the question that we just created, which is what is the name that you want to give this virtual machine, right? And then you're going to do the same thing here for the other one, which is where do you want to place this. So if you hover over it here, you'll find that it's telling you what the properties of this particular parameter are. If you wanted to, you can also move this a little bit and you'll find that it's VM name here and cloud here, so you'll know which one to map where. When you're ready, we're going to go ahead and click on Next. If you had any internal knowledge base articles that you've created, you can link them in here. This is very helpful because as you change technicians, as new engineers come and go from your environment, if you get them into the habit of creating these knowledge base articles on what to watch out for, known issues, etc., well, you can link any of those relevant knowledge base articles in here. We don't have anything at this point, so we're just going to go ahead and click on Next. You have the option of saving this as a draft or releasing it. I'm going to go out and publish this so that we can create a service offering out of it. You have, if there was a offering owner, again, you can specify that particular owner in there. And if there's any other internal notes that you wanted to add in, you have the option of doing so. Once you're ready, we're going to go ahead and click on Create. And there you go. We're going to go ahead and click on Close. Now, we're not going back to the PowerPoint, so don't worry. Just assume we went back and we put a checkbox next to that. And let's go about creating a service offering now, which is the final step. So the service offering is really cool. What it does is it's essentially, think of it as a consolidator of service requests. It's that one location that you go to on the portal, for instance, that is the high-end banner that you click on that shows you the requests for a particular category, for instance, virtual machines. So let's go about here and create a service offering. We're going to right-click, Create Service Offering. We're going to go ahead and click on Next, and we're going to give this a name. So maybe this will be the virtual machine service offerings. So you can have more than one service request here and then allow the user to choose, well, what type of service request they want. Now this is again an easy way of consolidating them, organizing them, structuring them, so that if someone wants anything to do with service requests that have to do with virtual machines, then they're going to come under the VM service offerings and they're going to choose that request that they want. You can give it a category if you choose to do so, any particular language. You can give it some kind of an overview if you wanted to give it more description here and a more detailed description. We have it associated with the right management pack that we've just created. We're going to go ahead and click on next. Any service level agreements, information that you want to specify here, any link for additional information, for instance, maybe it's a web page or it's an email address, the cost information, how much is it going to cost you for this particular VM, the link for additional information around that. So again, this might be a brief description of the service level agreements. Maybe you're saying, hey, we will guarantee 99.999% uptime, and then you can give them a link to go and understand the finer print here. And you can do the same thing from a cost perspective. Give the cost for this virtual machine, and if they want more information on, well, what are the different costs that you have. If you've got a web page that's created internally, then you can link to that. We're going to just keep those as blank here. I just wanted to show you the power of these offerings, how much you can build automations into it. And recall when we were talking about Azure in the earlier lessons, this is how, essentially Azure is a little more complicated and complex and more development's been put into it. But if you spend enough time on a virtual machine manager and its components, well, you can get very, very close to having something very similar to Azure. If there was any related services that you wanted to add in, then you would select that. I don't have anything at this point, so I'm just going to click on next. This is the knowledge base articles again, if you wanted to attach any of them. We don't have anything, and this is where you come about attaching those request offerings. Now keep in mind, we only have one request offering that we've built, but if we had any more of those, then you can come in here and essentially specify those particular request offerings in here, and as a result you might have multiples of them. So as these users are going into the VM service offerings, they might see more than just this particular one that we've provided for them. We're going to click on next here. I don't want to keep this in draft. We're going to go about publishing it. I don't have an offering owner, and I'm not going to give it any kind of more notes in here. Next, and let's go about creating it. All right, there you go. We're going to go ahead and click on close, and now we're going to switch back to the presentation. All right, so we created a service request, and then we also created a service offering. So we've completed all of the steps to create that self-service offering. Now the last thing that I want to show you is what the user is going to see when they connect from a browser, and how this is going, how they go about creating or requesting that new virtual machine. Are you guys ready to culminate this lesson? Culminate this entire course, actually. Let's do it. All right, so I've already installed here the Service Manager web console, the SharePoint site. I've already done that in the background. If you're going to do that one more time, you're going to need a Windows Server 2008 R2, simply because SharePoint 2010, as of this recording, doesn't get installed on a Windows Server 2012. So you'll probably have to bring up another server, put Windows Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 on it, put SharePoint Services on it, and then install these two components. What I would recommend is not doing it with SSL. There's some quirks and tweaks and configuration that might give you some challenges. And if you just want to follow along with my course, install it first without SSL, and then you can layer SSL on top of it later. So I've done all of that, which brings us to this particular screen. Again, this doesn't look exactly like Azure, but it's pretty close. So under General here, it's giving you, well, what types of offerings do you have access to? Well, I have access to my VM service offering. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Once in there, you'll find, again, you see how all the components that we've been creating are now showing up. Consider me a user at this point. I am user going to this particular website in order to request a new virtual machine. What I want to do at this point is I want the new virtual machine request. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Once that comes up, what we need to do is click on go to that request. And remember those values that we entered in here? So for instance, if we wanted to deploy this into our cloud, we would place this on WEPS, right? That's the name of our cloud that we created during the course. And then if we wanted to give this a particular name, then maybe this one would be, I don't know, let's call this FS01HR, for example. That satisfies the minimum character requirements. Remember, we put in a minimum character requirements of 6. So if I remove one of those characters, voila, it's going to give you that particular tip that basically says, nope, you need one more character. So it's between 6 and 15. So we've given it one more. So this is the file server 01 for HR. You can do FSHR01 if you wanted to do that. And it gives you here again, how this is going to go about getting created. You can click on next to go to the next section essentially. This will essentially allow you to confirm that these are the values that you want to provide. If you click on submit, this is going to go about then sending this particular request to whoever is going to need to approve it. And then it's going, if that particular request gets approved, then it's going to go about creating it. So once I click on submit, you'll find that our request has been submitted, and it's giving you a particular request number here. So if I click on that service request number, it displays all the information about it. I can click on browse if I need to. I can update it, I can cancel it, etc. Now, because I'm also the administrator or the approver, and I'm doing this again just to, in typical cases, you wouldn't be the requester and the approver unless it's very, very particular case. But in this case, I'm also the approver. So I can go to my actions here, and you'll find that I have an action that is waiting for me, which says, the particular user or a request has been submitted. You can go about clicking on that request. Again, it'll take you to that earlier page, shows you the request. You can take a look at any of its components. Once you're ready, you can either approve this or you can reject it. Now, you can also select a reviewer, and then we're going to go ahead and click on approve here. You can enter any particular comments, especially if you're rejecting this, then you can put in any comments. For now, I'm just going to, if I need to put anything, I can just put approve. And then we're going to go ahead and click on save. This will go about submitting this request into Service Manager. Service Manager is then going to take that request, it's going to tunnel it through Orchestrator. Once it's gone through Orchestrator, Orchestrator is going to take it and then apply it through Virtual Machine Manager. It's going to bring up that virtual machine, bring up the template, create the virtual machine, populate it with the right attributes that we've given it here, and then deliver it back to the user in a usable format. So now if I click on my requests again here real quick, you'll find that I can get some status on what's going on with my request. You'll find that the review process was completed, and now it's sending it for VM request and creation. So that's in progress at this point. So that's really all I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you that entire process from start to finish, from why we created all of these building blocks, why we connected and integrated all of these systems and components together. And so what did we cover in this lesson? Well, we started off by talking about Orchestrator and the importance of Orchestrator and what we can do with Orchestrator. We went about integrating Orchestrator with Service Manager, and we did that with all the different components and all the different steps. We created the integration packs, and then we created our runbook, and then we integrated runbook into Service Manager, and we created that runbook activity, and then we created the template and the service request and the service offering. We put all of that together, and then we accessed that service offering through the website as a user. We submitted a request, and then we approved that request since we're also the administrator. We went about looking at the status, which meant we've gone through reviewing has been completed, and it is now in the process of being deployed. So this is the process from start to finish. This is really, really exciting stuff to get to this point. It's been a long course, probably one of the longest courses that I've recorded, I filmed, and it's very cool to see all these building blocks to getting you to this point, and giving you this knowledge to go about and doing this on your own, for yourself, in your environment, for others, and translate that knowledge into power and go about advancing your career. Now, we're not done yet. We still have one lesson around Data Protection Manager, but this lesson was kind of sweet and very special to my heart. So I truly hope you enjoyed it a lot.